Paranormal Punches is part of the Podbelly Network. Go to podbelly.com for more great podcasts.
Hey y'all, this is Frank the Bigfoot, and you're listening to the Paranormal Puncher.
Hey friends, welcome to a special episode of Paranormal Punchers. I'm Mark.
I'm Alicia.
And we are here with John Olsen, author of the new book, Beyond Stranger U.S.
How we doing, guys?
Doing well. And welcome back to the show. This is your third appearance on the show.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I just love the show. You guys do an awesome job. So I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. I mean, at this point, you're practically a co-host.
Right.
I don't know about that, but I do appreciate you having me back. So.
Now, the new book, tell everybody a little bit about that, and then we'll jump into a couple scary stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is my fifth book in the Stranger Bridgerland book series. I've been collecting stories and interviewing people for almost 30 years now. Holy cow, I feel old. So they're just true paranormal, firsthand paranormal accounts. I interview people and then put them in the archive, and the best ones I put in my books. And it's just great to be able to interview people and hear their stories and just learn more about the paranormal. And it's just really fun. Like you guys know, it's just fun to hear the stories and get them out there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for everybody listening, when we say stories, these are true paranormal stories. You've talked to people all across the U.S. It's not like works of fiction.
Right.
These are people's, some of them truly scary encounters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are. And I always, make sure that they're firsthand. They're throughout my whole time of collecting stories and interviewing people. You always hear those stories of, oh, this happened to my uncle's brother's best friend's cousin, and those are great stories too. But I like to hunt down and find, the actual person that it happened to. And I love when I'm interviewing them and you can hear the fear in their voice, and you get that same feeling of when they went through it. And it's amazing to me, the more people I meet and get to hear their stories, just how crazy the world is and how crazy the world of the paranormal is with these stories. It's just awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're interviewing people, is it sometimes hard or difficult for them to tell this story to you, or you're just one of those kind of people that it's really easy just to talk to you about the experience?
Well, how I got started was I had my own experiences growing up in a house. It was over 100 years old, and it was very active. And so I had a lot of my own, ghost stories and my own experiences. And because of that, I think people felt more comfortable sharing their stories with me. They feel a little bit more, I guess you could say, safe, because I kind of understand from their point of view what's going on. And so I think that helps them a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I could keep asking you questions about writing the book, but man, I'd love to get a couple of these stories. Now, I was reading through some of it, and obviously one that jumped out, because we talked about this a long time on the show, but you have one story called Black Eyes in the Moose Jaw.
Yeah. So I was contacted by Alicia, and she found me through another radio show and brought me this story. What's interesting is, I interviewed and had one of a black-eyed story, of black-eyed kids from a local area where I was from. And after that went out in my first book, it was amazing to me how many people came to me and said they had experience with black-eyed kids. It seemed really, super rare, but the more I get out there, the more, I realize they're kind of, coming in. And this is the first one that I met somebody outside of the United States that had this experience. And Alicia was 21. She lived in Moose Jaw, up in Canada. She had moved to Moose Jaw, and she was working as a waitress there. And she met this gentleman named Greg. They started dating, and they moved on, and it moved pretty fast. And she ended up moving in with Greg. And at first, he was really nice, a really nice guy, and was great, as a boyfriend and everything. And the more they lived together, the more possessive he got, and the more angry he got. And he kind of turned quite a bit, she said, on him. And one night, they had a party with a bunch of Greg's friends, and everybody left around midnight, 1 o'clock-ish. And Greg had been nice all night, but he'd been drinking, and he got really angry as soon as all those friends left. She was trying to be nice to everybody. He accused her of flirting with his friends, and she just got really upset. And they had a fight, and she stormed out of the house in the middle of the night. And she drove around for a while and ended up in a parking lot by a park. And she's really upset, and she's sitting there crying and just, feeling, pretty upset and a lot of emotions. And all of a sudden there's a knock at her driver's window, and she jumps and looks, and here's a kid around 10 years old, and he's got a gray hoodie pulled over his face, and he's tapping on her window, and he just, talks to her and says, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, no, I'm fine." And, he steps closer to the car, and he says, "Why don't you let me in and we'll talk about it?" And she said that she got just the most cold, scared feeling when he did this. It was just like fight or flight that came over her. And she said, "No, I'm okay." And about this time, he turned over his shoulder and was talking to somebody else. And she noticed there was another kid there, a little bit taller, but same kind of gray hoodie pulled over his face. And she's wondering, why are you guys out in the middle of the night? It's, in the middle of the night, you guys are young kids. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And the boy turned back to the window, and he said, "I'm sorry. You're so sad, Alicia, but we can help you. Just let us in." And it kind of was a wave of shock that came over her, because she didn't know these kids. She had no idea how they knew her name. And alarm bells go off, and she's like, "No, just leave me alone. I'm gonna leave." And she goes to turn on her car, and she looks up, and the older boy is right next to her window, and he's come up really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Alicia, we can stop Greg from hurting you ever again if you just take us home with you." And she's like, ice cold chills through her body, just deeply afraid. And she screams, "No way, I'm out of here, leave me alone." And she takes off. She goes home. Greg's actually passed out on the couch, and she just makes an overnight bag and heads to her friend Amy's house. And she's distraught from the night, horrified by what's gone on with these kids. She's scared to death. And usually this is where the story kind of stops when I interview people. But she had a very interesting thing that happened from then on. She went to Amy's house and kind of told her about it. And Amy was like, "Yeah, sure. You sleep in the spare bedroom." And Alicia was just upset. And she goes in, lays down in the spare bedroom. And she has this really vivid nightmare. I remember her telling me about this, that she really doesn't remember her dreams very often, but this stuck in her head like just horrible. She remembered she walked into a room. It was a dark room, black room, with one metal chair in the middle of it. And for some reason, she said she walked in and sat down in the chair. And when she did, the one wall across from her turned into a TV with static, a black and white TV. And then it goes to a picture of Greg's house. And the two boys are looking through the window, almost like they're looking for something. And she's just seeing this in her dream. And they turn and see her and walk towards her and walk through the screen and up to her. And she just in her dream, she's just crying and screaming. She's stuck to the chair. And she finally wakes up, and she goes to the kitchen, and her friend Amy just jumps up and hugs her and asks her if she's okay. And she, she's achy. She doesn't feel good. She feels sick. She takes, her Amy's boyfriend gives her some water, and she takes a drink and relays the whole story of the night before and the dream, and then she kind of looks out the window and she's like, "Oh, it's starting to get light. It must be early in the morning." And Amy looks at her and she goes, "You've been asleep for like 15 hours. We couldn't wake you up. You were crying in your sleep. We couldn't wake you up. We were going to call the doctor. We didn't know what was going on. We were really afraid you were really, really sick." And she was a little sick for a couple days, she said. But even though it was a horrible experience, it kind of turned her life around, she said. She went to school. She started working with youth groups, and it was interesting the way she talked about how she turned her whole life around. She left Greg, eventually found a really nice guy, and she's had a really good life. But the whole experience with these black-eyed kids, because when they did finally approach the car, that's when she saw that they had black eyes, and that's when she really freaked out. But that was, a really detailed. I loved how, she went into full detail. She was, she had written everything down, and so she wouldn't forget. And it was just like a horribly, terrifying story when she told it to me.
Right. Yeah, that one really terrified me when I was reading it. And then especially the fact that, yes, they already knew her name.
Yeah.
She hadn't told them that. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then when she actually got away and she went to her friend's house, I think she slept for like, what was it, 12 hours or something like that?
12, 15 hours. She slept forever.
Even though she didn't let them in the car with her, like she still was affected by whatever they are.
Yeah, whatever it was, it seemed to affect her. I kept going back when she's telling me this. I never really told her this when I was thinking about it, but I was thinking that it almost sounded like some sort of radiation poisoning or of some sort is what kept coming to my mind. But she was kind of sick for a couple days, but that first night she was just really sick. So yeah, definitely terrifying for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. And everything I learned from horror movies, nothing good comes walking out of your television screen.
Right.
No, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that is for sure. So that's horrifying. But the dream, either one of those things would be terrifying, but to have both happen in one night is definitely, it's a no for me there. So
now you had quite a few stories about ghosts, and most of them seemed like they were trying to be helpful.
Yeah, there is.
There were a couple where I was like, oh boy, this seems very aggressive and like they're trying to hurt you.
Yeah. And which one was that again? I'm sorry.
The Possessive Ghost, I think you were talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that one was also in Canada. Yeah, it was really interesting. I got contacted by this person. My last book, the book before this, which was Stranger U.S., went out, and I was able to go on a couple shows in Canada, which was awesome. But and I was able to get a few people to contact me. And this was Sarah that contacted me. She grew up and lived in British Columbia. And she talked about when she was in her early 20s, she'd been married before and it didn't work out, and she swore she'd never marry again. And she went a long time and met a guy at work, and Ben, and he would always flirt with her and everything, and she really liked him, but didn't want to, marry or work with somebody she was dating. But when he moved on, they finally agreed, they'd go on date. And she was 30 at the time and did finally marry, dated Ben for a while and then got married. And the thing about Ben was Ben had been married before as well, but his wife had died. He was a widower. His wife had passed away several years in a car accident before. And she was actually, Sarah was the first guy or girl that he had dated after, and they did get married. And what was interesting is after the honeymoon, Ben owned his own home, which he had for a long time. And so she moved in with Ben. And, after a while of living there, everything was fine. And then some weird things started happening. She would wake up in the morning and her her makeup bag had been dumped out all over the floor, and she would call Ben and ask if he knocked it off, and he's like, no, and then there were times where she felt like she was being watched there in the bedroom, and there were a couple times where her clothes would be thrown on the floor, and just really weird things that were happening. And disappearing, like her hairbrush would disappear, and then she would find it a while later. She was going to work and laid out her dress and shoes and jumped in the shower, and then she got out, and one of the shoes is missing, and the dress is crumpled up and thrown on the floor, and she knows she's the only one there because Ben's gone to work. And she's like, what is going on? That, so strange, and things started escalating. She started feeling not only things were going missing, but she'd felt like she'd been shoved a couple times. Her stuff was still going missing, and then she started seeing a shadow figure in the bathroom, which was really kind of weirding her out. She had her hair pulled a couple times. She woke up in the middle of the night and felt like what she thought was a bug bite, and it hurt really bad. And she kind of jumped out of bed and turned on the light, and there were scratches down her leg, like somebody had just scratched her, and it was deep enough that little dots of blood were starting to bubble on the skin, and she just got this feeling she was not welcome. And finally, one morning, she, if I remember correctly, she had another experience with being scratched, seeing this dark figure in the bathroom, and her hair being pulled, and she just had enough. And she had this feeling that it was Jill, Ben's first wife, still in the house, and was extremely jealous of Sarah being married to Ben. That was the feeling she was getting, and the attacks were getting even worse. The scratches, the hair pulling, and one day she finally just, said, that's it. She left the house. She called Ben and, in tears, and said, that they had to move, that she wasn't going to do it anymore. And she, in that particular thing, she saw the shadow of a woman that was standing in the bedroom, and she couldn't make out the face, but she recognized the outline and realized that this was Jill. This was the first wife, and that she was super angry at her for being married to Ben. They did, she literally left and never went back to the house. Ben had to pack up and get her stuff. She lived somewhere else while they sold the house, and luckily nothing followed them when they left. But yeah, it was really interesting. Because I think, if I remember correctly, when I was interviewing her, she said, that Ben really only had nice things to say about her, but that apparently she was a very jealous person, and which obviously came through. It goes back to my saying, if somebody's jealous or a jerk in life, they're probably that way in the afterlife too. So it's kind of falls into that category. But that was a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be actually just awful.
Right.
It would, right? You think you found happiness and everything, and something like this pops up and kind of scares you to death. So
Oh, wow. There was one story when I was reading through that, because it was like maybe the first time you were actually on the show. Mm-hmm. You told us this story of a doppelganger.
Oh, yeah.
Sure enough, in your new book, there's another story about a doppelganger, but this one's even more intense.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I
So
think it was called It Was Not My Brother.
It Was Not My Brother, right? Yeah, this one falls into the stories that I collect. I call them glitches in the matrix or something, because they don't necessarily fall into any other category of ghosts or anything like that. And this one was of like a lot of the glitches in the matrix. This one was a little bit more intense, especially when I was interviewing him. His name was Chris. And he lives just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And he contacted me after one of my shows and found me through my website, and I got to interview him. He grew up there in Columbus. He has 3 brothers, nice family, grew up. At the time, he's in his early 20s and working in an office there just outside Columbus, Ohio. And he said that he was at the office one day, and his boss was having stomach problems. And because he's was the junior member of the office, he had to do a lot of the go for things, go for this, go for that. And his boss sent him to the store to get some medicine for him. So the little grocery store that he went to is only 2 or 3 blocks from the office, so it's not too far. And he said he hopped in his car and he drove down and got into the parking lot. And as he walked into the grocery store, this wave of nausea came over him, and he just became dizzy and nauseous. He said it was really strange. He's never really had something like that happen before. It was the point where he had to sit down. There was some little benches right there in the inside of the store. He sat down for a minute to catch his breath and go through, figure out what's going on. And it passed fairly quickly after he got in. And he said he got up and walked in the store, and the store seemed a little darker than usual. And he was really confused because, he'd been there a week ago, maybe 8-10 days ago. He'd been to this little store before, but things had changed, that they had rearranged it. The check stands were on the opposite side from what he remembered, and it was just really weird. And so he started walking down the aisles, and nothing was where he remembered it being. And he finally found the medicine aisle, and he's standing there looking for the right medicine. And somebody walks up on his right side, and he glances over and then back to the medicine, and then he realizes, oh, hey, that's my brother. His brother that lives in the area. His brother named Sam. And he's like, oh, hey, Sam, what's going on? And his brother kind of looks at him and kind of gives him a brush off and says, oh, hey, how's it going? And he's like, hey, I thought you guys were on vacation. I thought you and Steph, which is Sam's wife, was on vacation. He's like, I thought you guys were on vacation. When did you get back? And his brother looks at him and just glares at him. And he's like, I'm sorry, bud, I don't know no Steph, and I don't know who you are. And he walks past him and heads towards the counter. And he's like, it was so weird because, it's just, that's my brother. And he's being maybe he's playing a trick on me, something. And he comes around and he kind of punches him playfully in the shoulder. And he's like, hey, what are you doing? What's up? Why are you acting so weird? And this guy turned on him and poked him in the chest, just really angry, and said, I don't know who you are. You leave me alone. And he went up to the front counter, and he's just kind of standing there dumbfounded. And this guy that was Sam or wasn't Sam, he paid for his stuff and just glared at him again, really angry, and then walked out. And so he's just really confused. So he goes back and he gets the medicine, and he goes to the counter. And he said it was weird too, because the woman that was running the counter was an older lady, and she was really gruff and angry too, just seemed overly angry. Mm-hmm. And he paid the money, and he's like, as I go to leave, this woman growls at me like a dog. He says, it's the strangest thing. And he's like, and he just shakes his head, and he goes and walks through the door. And as he walks out of the grocery store, it's the same wave of nausea hits him and dizziness. And he's just like, what is going on? And he goes in his car and turns on the AC and blows it in his face and sits there for just a minute. He said he didn't sit there very long. And then it kind of left him a little bit. And so he drives back to his office and comes in, and his boss is like, where have you been? And then his boss looks at him, he goes, are you okay? And I guess he was like sweaty and just looked sickly. And he's like, I'm just not feeling very good. And his boss is like, well, is that why it took you so long? And he's like, what are you talking about? He says, his boss is like, you've been gone for 2 hours.
Wow.
And he looks at his watch and he left at noon, and it should have taken him 30 minutes tops to do all of this. And he's literally been gone 2 hours. And he looked at his boss and he's like, I'm really not feeling good. And his boss sent him home. And he went home and went right to bed and slept all night, he said. And in the morning, he called his brother, and his brother was still on vacation, hadn't seen him, had no idea what he was talking about. And, he just kind of was wondering what in the heck happened to me that day. What went on? Because he's like, did I step through a bubble into another dimension for a minute?
Right.
Did I, where did I go? Because, it's just strange. And I asked him too, I said, did you ever go back to that store? And he's like, if I ever had to run errands, I went somewhere else. I said, weren't you curious if it was back to normal? And he goes, nope, I did not want to go back to that store.
Yeah, I had said doppelganger because he saw somebody look like his brother. But again, I listened to you tell the story. Like, it's like he walked into an alternate reality.
Yeah.
Right.
A tear in the multiverse that he stepped through.
Yeah, there was another chapter, I think it was called Lost, where the guy was a delivery driver, and he always drove that neighborhood, and then all of a sudden it was almost like he was on a different neighborhood. Everything was kind of backwards, so there was different languages. It was very confusing. And I was like, wow, there's like two where I think they went through a portal.
Right. That was the other one. Yeah. It was called Lost. That was Garrett. He was a driver in Denver, outside of Denver. He didn't say the name of the company, which is fine, but he delivered cleaning stuff from, like, they would take the rugs and get them cleaned and like deliver uniforms that were cleaned. And he had the route that he'd done for years, and he turned the corner. This was the interesting thing about him. He didn't get sick, but it was like it got ice cold. It was a warm part of the year, but the inside of his truck got ice cold as he turned this corner. He said, I could see my breath, and suddenly I wasn't on the same street that I would normally be on. It was a subdivision that he usually snuck through. He wasn't necessarily supposed to go through subdivisions with his truck, with his delivery truck, but it was so much faster. And he said that normally, 2-story houses built in the 80s and 90s, and normal looking residents, but all of a sudden they're like cement dome houses with 2 windows, and the cars that were in the driveway he said they look like a Hummer with like a glass covering over them. And he just got the weird, he stopped because he's like, where in the heck am I? And somebody was peering at him out of the window in front of the house that he'd pulled out, just making him feel really uncomfortable. And he drove back, turned around and drove out of the subdivision, and everything went back to normal for him. But there for a short time, it was the same kind of thing. It was in another dimension. Did he just see into something else? It's like the old show, Twilight Zone, kind of a Twilight episode for this guy. He just seemed to step into another dimension. It was really weird.
That's crazy. I can guarantee he probably didn't get his deliveries done in time.
Right. I think for the rest of the time, I would take the long way around that.
Yeah, sure.
You just never know how many times it makes me wonder, because I'm a big fan of reading the missing 411 books and missing people cases and stuff. You wonder if there's not some of these cases where somebody did that, but they weren't able to come back, and now they're just missing somewhere, strange. But
or even some of the strange cryptids and any of the paranormal maybe bleeding through from that side.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ooh, that's crazy. That could be another book.
Yeah, there you go. That'd be awesome. So
Now, that was just like 4 examples, but this book is there's like what 20 some paranormal experiences in here.
Yeah, there's quite a few different experiences. I mean, I put everything in there from ghosts to Bigfoot and black-eyed kids and all kinds of stuff like that. There's just, the ones that I find the most fascinating. My wife and my editor helped me pick, the best of the stories and put them in the books as we go. I just started this week on the next book, which I hope will be out next year. So it just
That's
keeps
awesome.
going. So yeah, it just keeps going. So
again, I don't want you to read all the stories for us.
No.
But you mentioned Bigfoot.
yeah.
So it's like, can you tease us with one of the tales about Bigfoot?
Yeah, you bet. So one of the first stories in there, it's entitled Alaska Sasquatch. And this was gentleman's name was Mark, and he lived just outside of Juneau, Alaska. And at the time he was dating a girl, Freudian slip. He was dating a girl named Tiffany at the time, and they like to do outdoor things. Obviously, you're in Alaska, that's got to be a lot of things that they do. And they went out. It was the middle of the week, I believe, onto an island. It's called Douglas Island, and it's big island out there. Alaska it's just the wilderness. And they'd gone on a hike through the day, and as they're coming back, they got back to the car, and they're driving back, and they come around a corner, and he thinks, the first thing he thinks is that there's a big grizzly in the middle of the road, and he stops, and the grizzly stood up, which grizzlies will do too. But at that point, he realized this was not a grizzly he was looking at. It was a Sasquatch, great big Sasquatch. And he's just kind of amazed standing there. And then as it runs off, walks off the side of the road, only takes a couple steps and it's gone into the brush. And he realizes that it was there was some sort of small animal, roadkill or something like that on the road that it had in its hand. It had gone over and picked it up and was taking, walking across the road with it. And Mark mentioned that he'd heard a lot of stories about Sasquatch living in Alaska, but he really wasn't sure. He didn't believe it, honestly, to begin, he's really a down to earth guy, but to have it come face to face with him, right there in the middle of the road, not too far, and as big and muscular as it was, he said, and just enormous, and then obviously such human face. It was just, amazing to him. And, he's kind of spent a lot of time learning, and like it happens to a lot of us when we have an experience like that. It kind of draws us to learn as much as we possibly can, and the same kind of thing has happened to Mark since. So, but it's really interesting. It was really kind of a fun one.
Yeah, that never happens to me. I think
Right.
I want to see Bigfoot.
Right.
Yeah.
You think.
Right. You never know until it happens, but
No.
that's the one that I would like to do too. That I would love to see a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and they do have sightings in my area, so maybe someday we'll see. So
Yeah, if it happens, let us know. You got to come back on the show again.
Right.
yeah, I will definitely. So
Why don't you let everyone know where they can get the book?
yeah, so it's called Beyond Stranger U.S. You can find it and all of my other books on Amazon. You can look up Beyond Stranger U.S. Or look up the Stranger Bridgerland book series. You can contact me at strangerbridgerland.com at my website. You can get a hold of me, find out where I'm speaking, what's going on, how to get a hold of the books, and all of that fun stuff on there as well. So,
And I'll put links in the show notes so everybody can find it. Now, one last thing I'm really curious about, and it was right in the intro of the book.
mm-hmm.
You talk again, and you had mentioned before that you lived in a haunted house for a while. And you were having a little bit more experience when you were trying to clean up the basement.
Yeah.
And was it in your parents' house?
Yeah, it isn't in my parents' house. About a year ago with COVID and everything, my parents started having some health issues. So my wife moved we were living in a town called Lewiston. We moved back to the small town, and so that we could, be closer for my mom and dad. And one of the things that I was doing, especially to help them, was clean up the basement. And I was in the basement, and I'd been cleaning up, and there'd been a few weird things happening. And I'm sitting there kind of looking over the basement, and there's a lot of fishing stuff and all kinds of stuff in the basement. And all of a sudden, I got first I got whacked on the head. And I looked up, and it's a fishing pole that's hanging over my head, but somebody had to pull it down to smack me on the head with it, and it was still wiggling a little bit. And then I'm like, okay, yep, I know I'm cleaning the house. I know you don't like it. And then I kind of got pushed a little bit while I was down there too. And I said, okay, I'm going to go out for a little while. You compose yourself, kind of thing. Then I'll be back. I still got to clean up this house. And so yeah, there's still things that go on in the house like that. I'll tell you one more that happened that's not in the book, because it happened about a month ago.
Oh, wow.
My wife was over to check on my parents, and upstairs, it's our cat, but she likes my parents' house, but she likes the upstairs. It's like this cat's claimed the upstairs. She doesn't like people. So we have her food bowl and everything in the upstairs of the house. So we go up twice a day. Somebody goes up to feed her and check the litter box and everything. Well, as my wife turns to look up the stairs, and these are the stairs where, as a kid, we always heard footsteps and everything like that. And she looked up, and at the top of the stairs, there was a man's hand with a white shirt around the corner. It was just underneath the light switch. And my wife looked and stopped. And then she saw the hand just slide around the corner, like really creepily around the corner. And she walked up the stairs, and there's no other way to get up there. And and when she gets up, there's nobody up there. But that was the first time my wife has actually seen something like that. I guess it was a partial apparition, but
wow.
It was, she didn't grow up doing it, so it really creeped her out a lot. And all I could think was, oh, that's so cool. I wish I'd have been there. And she's like, you're crazy. So, yeah, there's still things that go on in the house, and still, there'll be times when things are very active over there. But yeah, it's really fascinating.
John, thank you so much for hanging out with us, telling us scary stories. I can't wait to finish the book. Anything else, Lish?
No, I found the whole book very fascinating. A lot of these stories, I was like, these are really good. I can't wait for other people to read this.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I so appreciate you having me on. It's always fun to come talk creepy things. So
great.
Absolutely. You're welcome on anytime, John. And we'll talk very soon. And thanks again for spending some time with us.
You bet.
Hey, everybody. Remember, if it's not weird,
it's not worth checking out.